Welcome to another episode of the Whole Note Podcast. My name is Shin Young Kim, and today we will be joined by cellist Jonathan Swensen. Jonathan is a recipient of the 2022 Avery Fisher Career Grant and a first prize winner of the Young Concert Artist Auditions. He has performed all around the world, performing with orchestras in both Europe and the United States. Jonathan and I sat down as he shared with us his methods to practicing, his relationship with Shostakovich's second cello concerto, and much more. Thank you so much again for joining us today. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We hope you enjoy. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Jonathan, you've been kind of a superstar on the scene in classical music, and so I'm really excited to talk with you about your work as a cellist. But before we do, I want to dig into your beginnings as a cellist. And I understand that you came to the cello upon hearing the Elgar Cello Concerto for the first time at the age of 6. Can you share with us how you came across that work and how it catapulted your work as a cellist today?
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit of a longer story than what would fit into a bio, but I heard recording of the Elgar Concerto already when I was, I think, around 4, by Jacqueline Dupre. The famous recording with her and Sir John Barbaroli, which was her first recording of the concerto. And I absolutely loved that piece. I've always loved that piece, and that piece is definitely the one that attracted me very, very strongly towards the cello. However, it wasn't until I heard it live with I heard it with Rolf Kirschbaum, and actually my dad conducting it in Scotland with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, when I was, yeah, 6 or 7. And when I heard that, then I really wanted to start. And then there just went another. I had a very kind of, I don't know how to say, like, normal kind of chill childhood. I wasn't really. My parents are both musicians, and that might actually have helped that, but they didn't push me as such. They didn't like push me to play the cello. It was very much me that wanted to play the cello. The only thing was my dad would ask me if a teacher asked me to play every day, would I do it? And I actually said no the first few years because I already knew I wanted to play the cello when I was like 4, but I just didn't feel ready to like have the commitment of maybe being forced to practice every day. I was very much a kid. And when I was 7, I said it, and then he asked the same question once again, and I said yes, finally. And then they went and got me a quarter-size cello, and I started digging into it. Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, it was definitely the Elgar Concerto that was my heart piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know your dad was a conductor, so have you worked with him?
Yeah, we've worked together a few times. He used to be a violinist as well. He stopped playing the violin 6 years ago or something like that, and just fully committed to conducting. But my entire family are musicians.
Oh, wow.
My mom is a violinist in the opera orchestra in Copenhagen.
Okay.
And my brother's a violist, my younger brother, and my uncle plays the oboe, and my other uncle plays the violin, and everybody
Oh,
plays
wow.
instrument. Yeah.
Wow. So
Except for the
music,
elder.
yeah. So music has always felt very natural to you, I'm assuming, because it's always been around in your life.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was 3, I was like, I took chopsticks and was like conducting Sibelius symphonies. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's just something about the Elgar Concerto, whether you're a cellist or, you're just a casual listener, it just really captivates the listener, I would say. And I'm not surprised that that piece in particular is what drew you into the cello. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So moving forward to later in life. So recently, last year, you graduated from the New England Conservatory with the prestigious artist diploma, studying with the legendary Lawrence Lesser, excuse me. Um, but I know that along with Mr. Lesser, you've studied with some very important teachers during your formative years and will continue to do so. So, can you
Sure.
talk a little bit about how each teacher that you studied with left a different musical imprint in your own life?
Yeah, sure. Um, I've always been, I think, very much a searching musician, if that makes sense. Um, I never believed that there was one clear answer to anything really
Mm,
somehow. So I actually really I chose very different teachers during the years of studying because I was really interested in hearing really different sides of the coin, if that makes sense, as
mm,
to how they relate to music and cello playing and so forth. And before I was studying with Lesser, I studied with a wonderful cellist who I recently actually saw and had a lesson with again,
mm,
whose name is Torleif Tedin, who's a wonderful Swedish cellist, huge, very warm sound and like extremely singing quality to his playing, and he had a very indescribable kind of quality of helping every student somehow thrive in their
mm,
playing somehow. He would very much change according to which student he was teaching, and adapt into their playing and
mm,
how they felt, and there are also like even something as basic as a every single body is different and every single arm
sure,
is different, so every
right,
sound is automatically going to be, you know, from a completely natural perspective, is going to
right.
be unique on its own. And this is what I thought was really special about him, was his way of helping every single student kind of thrive in their voice somehow, and in their body. It somehow, to me, it kind of felt a little bit like if you go to a really good massage, but just for sound. So a sound massage.
Mm. That's great. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I would leave those lessons like, oh, I can breathe again, and so happy about playing, and I felt like my creativity was suddenly, you know, or not suddenly, but it was thriving way more. And Lesser was a very different from that. Lesser was extremely creative and
Mm.
very close to the text, but at the same time weirdly open about the text, in my opinion.
Uh,
Yeah, and for somehow I felt like he's somehow had a sort of way of looking at something which was radical and
mm,
like with a very strong opinion, but at the
mm,
same time extremely expansive and broad and open-minded in a way, actually. I felt. But he, for me, was way more somehow intellectually stimulate from an intellectually stimulating kind of point of view, whilst Tour Life was maybe more focused on the singing and the body and like the mechanics, you know, the
mm,
physicality
sure.
part of the cello playing and the spirit behind the music. So those two, they were very much night and day, and I had a great struggle in the beginning of studying with Lesser of finding a way of unifying those things.
Mm,
But
mm,
now, after having studied with them both, I'm extremely happy to have done so because I feel I feel that I have a really big spectrum and an even clearer viewpoint on the fact that the answers are hard to find, but when you feel something, that's really when it matters in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I've had really different teachers, and those two were definitely the most different, I would say, and the most dominant
Mm,
in my life. And now I'm going to start with Gary
mhm,
Hoffman,
mhm,
Chappelle, which is something I'm really excited about. And I already had a few lessons with him, and I really like him. And
mm,
I mean, by now it's different because I don't know how to explain it. It's sort of more a need for a kind of a mountain of support in a way
mhm,
that I feel would be nice to have. More than like, for example, Lesser was like, now you're very much under a hard education, you know, and
mhm,
I'm here to teach you all these things. But by now, I really want to play for someone I really trust, and I
mm,
really trust Gary,
mm,
and his way of looking at things is kind of similar to mine in the sense that he has so many perspectives and a
mm,
lot of on the other hand, you know, type of sentences when he's
mm.
teaching. And I feel like this sort of energy is kind of what I'm really happy about getting
Yeah.
the next 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, sorry, what was the name of your first teacher again? It was Mr.
oh no, my well, he wasn't my first teacher.
Or hmm,
Before Mr. Lesser was his name was Torleif Tedin. I can
Tati.
also
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Tedin. Yeah.
No, but I appreciate his thought process because you're right. Like everyone is built differently, so
Yeah.
there's really no one way of playing. Of course,
Yeah.
the bow hold. Even then, like some people have a different bow hold, or
Yeah.
just everyone works differently. And as long as you have a basic grasp of sound and intonation, I feel like it's better to let people play the way that is natural to them because you're
Yeah.
right. I've seen teachers that work in a way where it's like, this is how you play, and you just have to follow that. And I don't know if that way, maybe it worked maybe 50 years ago, but today I don't know if that kind of teaching can work so well.
No, I don't
Um,
know either if it can. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that there's a lot of I think teaching I was just teaching and I I love teaching.
Yeah.
I love teaching and
Mm.
I think it's a really important thing, but it's also it can really be misused and
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like there is so many, you know, if you talk with friends or so many people who's had like really horrifying bad experiences with a
Mm.
teacher or a mentor of some kind, and
Yeah.
it's a really big responsibility,
Right.
and I feel like uh, there it's I feel like it's coming, but I feel like there's
Mm.
a more general sense of kind of I don't know even how to say it, but the love for the music and
Yeah.
the love for playing
Mm.
is the number one most important thing
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
of all actually. I mean, and through that one gets inspired to get a better intonation
Yeah.
or a better sound
Right.
or feel great while playing or you know
Hmm.
all of those things is just a kind of a reaction to the basic love that that music is
Mm.
one could say.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I feel like there's been tendencies of how do you say of extremely inflexible people, but it's
Hmm.
again that's also like for example when I was studying with Lesser, he was sometimes really inflexible, but I felt like he did that because he knew me and he knew that I could
Mm.
take and he knew that I was able to handle it and I would actually take it as a motivation to
Mm.
practice even more, and he was right.
Mm.
uh I would leave I would leave a lesson really pissed off sometimes, but I mean, I would practice more. So I mean,
Oh
I
my
guess
gosh.
he did his job. Uh, um,
Uh,
so I mean, it's a very intricate art form in a way to be teaching because you have to be smart and you need to
mm,
know your student and you need to
yeah.
know how they respond. And when you see that they respond really positively to something, and sometimes it really can surprise. Like I gave a lesson some days ago, and I said something as a sort of a side comment or something at some
Mm,
point while I was teaching, and that changed everything immediately. I was like,
ah,
you
yeah.
know, so it's like it's also following those things I find
Yeah.
is good and like expecting the unexpected in a way,
Yeah.
actually. Um, and of course, it's good to have like a grounded kind of philosophy and so on, but when you see how the different students react really differently to different things, it becomes way more interesting as well because you
Yeah.
realize you're dealing with you're dealing with people,
Right.
um, and like everyone comes from different places, and it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Well, and I love what you shared about Mr. Lesser and how he's very flexible musically, because I think there's almost two different schools of thoughts when it comes to your commitment to doing what's in the score, right? Like some people are very, you just have to do what's in the score and that's like the Bible and you just follow that, right? But I think again, I had a friend that's a pianist, and we talked a couple months ago, and he shared how even Rachmaninoff, when he played his own works, he didn't do everything that was written in the score, right? So it's like, I think, of course, like you don't want to blatantly offend the music or the composer, but I think I think any composer, if they were alive today, they would appreciate a sense of uniqueness to your interpretation of their music, right? I don't think they would be so happy to just listen to everyone playing their music exactly the
same
same way
way.
that, yeah.
Yeah, it's so boring. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's also it's also I feel like a lot of I feel like there's a tendency to think, oh, an accent, so that means duh, And I mean,
Yeah.
an accent doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's actually incredible amounts of creativity behind what is written, and it can be
Exactly.
interpreted in many different ways. And an accent is so different when you look at it in a score by Schubert,
Hmm.
when you look at it in a score by Stravinsky or something. I mean,
Right. Right.
couldn't be more different. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of creativity to be found even behind what is written, and
Mm.
like so as I said, I don't think there's one truth, but I do think there's many truths in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and I think going back to what you were talking about with the accent issue, I think sometimes just something with the left hand can make the accent more unique instead of just trying to hammer it with the bow, right? Like
yeah,
even just a vibrato accent can be enough to kind of take care of
yeah,
written in. So yeah, no, that's
sure. If it's,
yeah,
I mean, and if it's a like, say it's a pianissimo accent or something, it could even
yeah,
just, it could be the tiniest of left hand impulses
yeah,
that could
yeah,
change the game at that moment.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
as a cellist, I would love to nerd out with you just talking about these things, but um moving forward a little bit. So like I mentioned, you finished your AD at NEC recently. But while you were at NEC, you were able to play, you got to play Shostakovich's second cello concerto with the school
Yeah,
orchestra. And I remember, I think a few days ago, I was at the gym listening to it, and it was a phenomenal recording on YouTube.
thank you.
Um, can you share a little bit about your relationship with this work and how it's unique from the more popular first concerto? Because I think until recently, it hasn't really been as played, but I'm seeing it more. I'm seeing more people perform it, especially for competitions now. And
Yeah,
so there's definitely a rise in growth and interest. So can you talk a little bit about your relationship with this piece?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I I really connected with that piece very on a very powerful level when even the first time I heard it. And I don't want to say better or worse, but it's for sure much more unique kind of
Mm.
Shostakovich than the first one is. The first one is so clearly kind of this military Shostakovich kind of on the edge passionate character. I feel like the second one is so weird and dreamy and kind of like being in a really dark place or like stuck in a swamp and searching for light of some kind and
Okay.
um extremely beautiful and I mean I really was for that concert you're talking about, I was going kind of insane towards the end, towards the concert, because I mean, that piece was kind of everything in my life the 2 weeks before playing it with NEC. And I mean, it is for sure a really, really dark, I mean, an
Mm.
incredibly dark piece. And,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so it's like then I started like because I was studying the score so much and I was
Mm.
really knowing every impulse and it's a little bit more complicated and weird than the first one and also for the orchestra because they have really really long notes for a long time and then it'll change like at an unexpected moment to something
Mm.
else and like the pizzicatos for the orchestra never comes in quite when you expect it and at the same time it's really slow at the same
Mhm.
time, and it's kind of slowly progressing. So
Mm.
if you're not concentrated, it's just it's really easy to that it doesn't really you don't really understand it. I think if
Mm.
you're as sitting in the orchestra or kind of like it's a piece one needs to know. I feel like. And it's a piece that's worth spending so much time studying on because there's so much interesting stuff about it. Like the fact
Mm.
that the whole thing, in a way, is just one big circle. He writes the whole tempo as 100,
Mm.
which is sort of impossible to do because it means that the first movement is super fast, uh,
Right.
and it means that the third movement is quite slow, some places. But I think it's more the idea of the whole piece being kind of one being
Mm.
that is behind that tempo marking than the fact that you have to play it in 100 constantly. I
Mm.
think that is less the point than the kind of completion of the work.
Right.
And yeah, there is. I think in a way this piece is harder to instantly love than the first one, but
Yeah.
when and if you get it, I think it's a deeper feeling and um almost philosophical in a way. And I was actually up to as a little funny side story, but because I was kind of losing it because I was the only thing was studying was that piece for many hours every day
Oh,
up to
wow.
the concert. And I started like, okay, I gotta like decompress somehow. So I started watching Monty Python in my free time. Uh, which is like, yeah, if listeners don't know, it's like one of the most silly comedy, British comedy satire shows, kind of. But it kind of worked because they are really making fun of society on so many levels
Yeah.
in Monty Python. And like Shostakovich at this point, he's like totally turned his back on society. He has no
Mm.
trust in really anything anymore, I
Mm.
think
Yeah.
at this point of his life. It was at the end of his life that he wrote the
Right.
concerto as well.
Right.
And then actually it started getting feeling even crazier to play this music because you start finding things that are actually sort of funny
Mm.
and humorous at times, and in a way that makes it a little bit even more kind of freaky because there comes
Yeah.
this kind of element of humor on top of this kind of horrifying stuff. But it's an amazing work. And it reminds me a bit of, I don't know if anyone's watched it. It reminds me a bit of the movie Eraserhead by David Lynch, which is
Okay.
which is equally dark and weird and kind of grimy.
Yeah.
Um, but there's yeah, it's one of the pieces, and I'm really happy that it's going coming more out there now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah. Well, and you're right because I think people, it's easy to be attracted to the first concerto because it's like very clear and it's very like you can understand very clearly from the beginning, really, like what it's about, right? Like
Yeah.
you were saying, it was very militant. But the second, it starts slow and it ends slow, so that it's kind of like the Tchaik Six, like Pathétique, or
Yeah.
other works that have that, but. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think musically speaking, and I've never played the piece, but having listened to it, it's in a way more interesting than the first because there's more layers to it, I believe. And
Yeah.
it really, even in the first movement, it takes time for it to kind of boil, but it really
Mhm.
does. So yeah,
Yeah, truly. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and there's so long lines. It's so
yeah,
hard. It's really hard because it's sort
yeah,
of like slowly rising, and
right,
you need like a lot of patience, and it's really challenging
yeah,
to pull it off convincingly. But I mean, we can
yeah,
just keep trying because it's really worth trying anyway. I mean,
yeah.
um, yeah.
Well, you kind of shared a little bit about how you were practicing and preparing for that concert. Can you talk a little bit about the process for you, not just with that piece, but just in general, like how you go about practicing and like how do you balance, focusing on the technical side while also trying to think about the musical aspect of every piece?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm way less kind of cutting board between the different sides of a piece when I'm practicing it. It's sort of a mishmash of all of it in a way. Like so
Mm,
when I'm practicing, I love practicing slow and
mm,
really meditating with a piece. I also generally I sit with the entire score and I also try to play like the piano part or the orchestra part just to understand the harmony on the cello actually
mm. Yeah, yeah,
while I'm also learning the other parts. And I really love practicing slowly and kind of meditating over all of the harmonies and the melodies and where it's going or where it's coming from. And I feel very creative doing that, and I also feel like time, like Einstein was right in the sense of time being relative,
mm,
because um, when I really zone into this sort of meditation aspect, and I feel like my subconscious and my consciousness of what I want to do with the piece come together, and I feel like it's possible to play the piece how I want in that
mm,
slow tempo
mm,
without having to overthink it.
mm,
I'm very much a kind of a intuition feeling type
mm,
person.
mm.
And I really like to investigate and hear all of the harmonies and feel all of the harmonies and like slowly let it grow, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to I mean, if it's a really technical passage of
Hmm.
something, I treat it a bit less like that. I
Mm.
start to treat it more like athletics or like a sportsman or something like
Yeah.
this. Like very much I like using metronome for really for technical passages
Yeah.
and starting extremely slow and very patiently putting it up.
Yeah.
Three beats or whatever you call it per
Yeah.
time I take it,
Right.
or even less sometimes. And like there's a passage at the end, you can also find this on YouTube, but the
Mm.
Kachaturian Concerto Rhapsody that I played some years
Hmm.
ago,
Hmm.
where the last 4 minutes is just basically like an Armenian circus music. really difficult and technical stuff that,
Yeah.
like, then the one day I could get it almost in tempo, and then the next day it was totally gone, so I had to start all over,
Yeah.
and you just sort of keep doing that. But then
Yeah.
at the end, actually, it did become relative again at the when I reached like the point of the concert, because I remember
Mm.
playing that at the concert, and it was just so satisfying to feel, actually to feel calm in the body and kind of feel
Mm.
the same way that I had been doing when I had been practicing it extremely slowly, if not
Right.
better. And that made the whole thing feel like one, and that made those, like, 1,000 notes fit into that one gesture that they actually are
Yeah.
all a part of. And like,
Right.
to realize that the picture is greater than one thinks at the beginning,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just a really satisfying thing at the end of the
Yeah.
day, actually.
Yeah.
And it opens the mind, and I think it's good for intelligence as well.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and brain chemistry and whatever.
Right.
I think that's true as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and I really appreciate that you shared that you have the score with you because especially as a younger student, it's easy for us to just want to focus on our part, but in
Mm,
reality, we're just like you said, one piece of that bigger picture. So
yeah.
even in concertos, it's like, okay, yeah, you might be the soloist, but like the orchestra is just as important, if not more important in many places. So
And it's still
yeah,
chamber music. I mean, it's
yeah,
forever chamber music. Like, I mean, sometimes I mean, even like in the Porto Concerto, at the minor melody of the first movement, you have a duo
yeah,
with the flute, and even though
yeah,
you can't even see the flute, you still have to like really connect with the flute, and
yeah,
like, you know, um, I think there's so much of this everywhere, and I
mm,
think everyone in life really wants to connect at the end of the day, and in a way,
yeah,
the idea of like ambition or reaching the top or all of this is sort of toxic, and kind of ruins the point of
yeah,
music, in my opinion, very often, because
yeah.
even when you're a soloist, my favorite concerto concerts that I heard was when I really felt that they were connected to each other,
Right.
between the parts, and so on. And it wasn't like that guy and then those people over there. And
Right. Yeah.
I didn't. I don't know how to explain quite what I mean, but I
Yeah.
like we were talking about, with every single body being different, and
Right.
I think that is something that should be embraced more in the
Mm.
world, because I feel like the individual, the I feel like, if I may go a bit far, I feel like the level
Mm.
is going up in general, in the
Yeah.
sense of the quantity of people who can play, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I feel like the voices are getting smaller,
Ah, yeah.
somehow, and that's what I think is I think that the world kind of needs
Mm.
voices at
Yeah.
the end of
Yeah.
the day, and like, if people are playing because their teacher told them to, that's not a great reason. I mean, and then you can kind of feel sorry for them, because the teacher in a way
Mm.
is repressing them, to
Yeah. Yeah.
to do that, because you don't have any other choice. That's the only, if you want to do this, you have to, and like the idea of pressure in that sense. And like, I would prefer passion, or vigorousness, or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
to pressure, honestly. And I think it's so important to try to spread this kind of vibe in the musical society, because
Yeah.
everyone is really doing their best,
Mm.
and I don't I think everyone is doing almost, like, so much their best that they forget what they really want sometimes. I
Yeah.
definitely do. And yeah, so that's I don't know why I came over to that, but I've just been thinking
Mm.
so much about this with voice. I recently heard an album by Charles Mingus, actually,
Mm.
with his big band, called the Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, an album
Mm.
from the beginning of the 60s. where it was like I never heard a voice that was just so clear and so grimy and dirty and like angry in many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
But it was just such a voice. You could just
Yeah.
hear like that was Charles Mingus. No one else could do that. And I think anyone can do actually do that
Yeah.
if they
Yeah.
really trust their body and really trust what they are looking for. So
Yeah.
I think a mixture of trust and searching is essential somehow.
Yeah. Well,
So enjoy
yeah.
it.
Mhm.
Yeah, just to enjoy it. And I think it's the
Yeah.
most important thing is to enjoy it.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I think it's really, I really agree with what you were saying about, in a way, the level of playing has gone up so high, but like the level, not level, sorry, like the voice or the curiosity is not the same level. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the advent of recordings and having everything at your disposal. And so now it's like you almost don't have to be creative because you can just listen and find whatever you want. And again, I think listening to as many recordings is great. But
Yeah.
at the same time, yeah, I mean, but at the same time, like what you were saying with the score, like looking at the score can help you like decide fingering sometimes, and understanding the harmony, understanding the color of that particular passage might encourage you to go, let's say, up the D string as opposed to staying on in first position, or something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
So it's I think you're spot on. It's so important to keep searching and keep being creative and not just being content with the quota, I guess, the status quo, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and also like just yeah, I think finding ways of non-judgmentalness and body
Mm,
mindfulness
mm,
practice is really is good as well.
mm.
Just to really I've been so fascinated. I had a few lessons with Don Weilerstein as well when I was at
Oh.
NEC. And
Mm.
I loved his way. And I also had a few lessons with Kim for that matter, Kim Fish
Okay. Yeah.
who
Yeah.
I also was a big fan of because they both have in extremely different ways, but they really have this kind of body mindfulness and like sound and warmth and kind of feeling the music in the entire body somehow
Mm,
philosophy which I think is so good to have and again it's like I love sitting with the scores so that I can imagine and feel all of the harmonies uh yeah, there's a tendency to play with one's eyes and
yeah.
rather than with the heart and it's that one needs to go. I have a really big ambition of being a teacher as well,
Yeah.
yeah, because I think it's a important thing and I feel like it does get mistreated at times.
Mm.
So whatever one can do to help that. I think is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So you actually already kind of touched on this topic a little bit with the Dvorak Concerto, but I understand that you'll be joining officially this fall the Bowers program of the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center.
Yeah.
I understand from before the recording that you have been playing with them a little bit already this year,
Yeah.
so that's wonderful. I also know that you play a lot of chamber music with your young concert artist colleagues,
Yeah.
one of whom, Albert, was our first guest on this podcast. So,
Yeah.
um, so shout out to Albert if you're listening. How has your work in chamber music helped in your own personal growth as a musician?
Oh, it's helped me a lot. I mean, it's also really helped me just basically as a person, I think,
Mm,
in many ways. Because as I said, I mean, I'm a very uh emotional person, and
mm,
I used to really get like I would get like kind of I think I could kind of lose my temper easily, especially
mm,
when I was younger and in a way that wasn't constructive. And playing chamber music and just basically playing with people and learning about people has just really helped me to gain more empathy, I feel like, and more understanding towards different kinds of viewpoints
Mm.
and different ways of looking at the music. And yeah, I mean, I love playing chamber music. I do it a
Mm.
lot, and it's really fun because one can sort of play around with it. And if it's a fun group, then like
Yeah.
everyone is so on board with uh, experimenting, and if it's a fun group as well, it feels so comfortable and like home, very, very easily um and quickly. And also if it's an extremely difficult, like say it's a contemporary piece that is like super challenging and that
Mm.
then you're not the only one suffering, like everyone is actually. So there's a sort of communal type thing that can
Mm.
help empower each other in
Mm.
the greatest instances of it. And it's always different. And I mean, music is always different, and playing with different people is always different.
Mm.
And this is just I feel like this gains me tremendous like uh, insight and curiosity and fascination with how different people like playing with. I've played with Albert a lot, for
Yeah.
example, who just mentioned, and that's always so much fun because he's a true investigator and laboratory type pianist. One can really experiment with him. We did Schumann at the Adagio and Allegro recently, and
Oh.
I saw some things in the score that he hadn't noticed, which really inspired him, and
Mm.
he saw some harmonic things and some real dissonances.
Mm.
Um in the music, which was so interesting. And like
Mm.
I felt like we were just empowering each other
Yeah.
and creatively, helping each other flourish somehow.
Yeah.
And that's so much more fun than when you start like in COVID or something, when I started feeling so isolated and like,
Yeah.
okay, I can play these harmonies on my cello, but I haven't actually been playing with a pianist for like half a year by now. Like, uh,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
So, as I said, everything is chamber music. But when you're playing with people that you enjoy and that you like, which I feel lucky to do very, very often,
Mhm.
it's just incredibly enriching. And you can leave from there, and things someone said to you, I mean, things somebody has said to me like 2 years ago will still pop
Mm.
up in my brain, and like, oh yeah, that was interesting, I should go into that more. And
Yeah.
like, so yeah, for me it's just been it's a great time, and I
Yeah.
love playing with people and learning about people. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think chamber music, obviously, like you mentioned, has a very human element to it, right? Interpersonal relationships on stage. But also, it's a true educational experience because let's say you have a trio or a quartet, and so you've studied with like two or three teachers, and then everyone else has studied with two or three teachers. So you're getting this like melting pot of different information and inspiration, and you're bringing that all together. And I think that is such a beautiful thing. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And playing in trios and playing in a trio and playing in a quartet is so different as well. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
such different functions. As a cellist, as well, mostly in a
Mm.
trio, it's a melodic element, and often in a quartet, you have a bass element and
Right.
the bottom kind of the universe, if that makes sense. Um, so it's very very different functions, and this is
Yeah.
something that really interests me. This summer, when I'm going to La Jolla, I'm playing
Yeah.
Schubert Death of the Maiden and
Mm.
Janacek Kreutzer Quartet, his first quartet, which is
Mm.
so beautiful. I recommend everyone listening to check that piece out.
Yeah.
I mean, Janacek has an ability to sort of like, I'll just get kind of tears in my eyes within 10
Yeah.
seconds of his music. There's
Yeah.
just there's something about it that I don't I can't quite grasp with human pain sensitivity. And
Right.
Yeah, it's very special. So
Yeah.
anyway, so that's really interesting for me because I'm not as experienced a quartet cellist as a
Mm,
trio or a
mm,
piano quartet or those kind of
right.
things. And I'm
Mm,
really curious to venture upon that and
mm,
get more into it because I think there's differences to it all, but at the same
mm.
time one needs to stay oneself at the same time.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
this is again those type kind of don't want to call them conflicts, but like meeting points that you gotta
Yeah.
find a way to unite. And
Mm,
yeah.
yeah. Well, and quickly before we move on, I remember one semester at Indiana, I took a unaccompanied Bach class taught
Uh,
by the Baroque violinist Stanley Ritchie. And yeah, so it was basically a class of string players, and we brought in, our cello suites or the partitas or sonatas, and we would play for them. And I'll never forget the first class of that semester. He said, "There's no such thing as unaccompanied Bach." Because even if you're playing Bach solo music, he wrote it in such a way where you're playing all the harmonies. You're not one voice. You're three or four different voices just in one instrument. So I thought that was such a profound thing, and I think
it's incredible.
yeah, and I'm sure with other solo works you've played, you probably feel the same way. Nothing is just one voice. So
No, 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 it's so interesting and sort of schizophrenic. Just
yeah,
like how many characters can be written within three. Like I'm practicing the Poulenc Sonata right now, and
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
totally in love with that piece. But that's
yeah,
like, six different facial expressions within 10 seconds or something like that.
yeah,
You
yeah,
never know where you have him.
yeah.
Bach is also so much fun in this with the bass and the melodies and how they intertwine and how they
Right.
are farther away from each other or come closer to
Yeah.
each other. And like, yeah, yeah. And playing
Yeah.
Bach for Mr. Lesser was also incredibly interesting because he had so much of this kind of creative insight into it with the
Yeah.
multiphonic kind of how many voicings there is in there and
Yeah.
like what you can find and what you can show once and what you can show another time. That's also
Right.
why so many Baroque musicians sometimes they repeat. If you're truly I've heard about these like really free Baroque musicians who only play Baroque and they'll like repeat like the first half of a Bach suite sometimes three times, sometimes one time, sometimes
Mm.
five times
Mm.
because there's so many different ways you can show the bass or the melody line and it's kind of limitless and that's
Mm.
I think what they're so fascinated by and that's why they do it. That's
Yeah.
why they because it won't be the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember watching a video of Franz Helmerson teaching on YouTube, and you might have seen it, but something he said that really struck with me was how he shared that each string is its own voice.
All
And
right.
and that sounds so basic, but when you really think about it, that really like we're our own little chamber group within just our instrument, with the way
Yeah.
we can that can really help determine, our fingerings, like I said before, and yeah, it's endless.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can. And that's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. So moving forward a little bit, I've been watching a lot of your performances on YouTube recently, and what I really love about listening to you is you have such a depth to um, your musicianship, and it's so vivid, and you have such a stage presence. When you're on stage, what is going through your head as you try to take your listeners on your musical journey, and how do you go about bringing this music to life and convincing or trying to convince your audience of your conviction musically?
Um, it's a very good question. And I mean, every single concert feels different because I've gotten pretty comfortable with my nerves and dealing with
Mm,
them, and I feel like it's possible to use one's nerves as a kind of a strength.
mm,
But like in general, what I really, really try to do is wipe the slate clean somehow. It's like because
Mm.
I mean, I'm spending so much time on this music, and I've been practicing it a lot. I mean, hopefully, I know how it goes, and I know the beginning and the ending and the middle, I'm hugely fascinated by jazz musicians and
Mm.
by improvisation.
Mm.
And I envy that kind of freedom a
Mm.
lot.
Mm.
And what I really try to do is just like, yes, I know there's a pianissimo there. Forget
Mm.
about it, kind of, new color. Somehow to start completely over and try to convince myself that it's the first time that I'm ever playing the piece,
Mm.
so that it feels as fresh as possible. I really want freshness,
Yeah.
and I really want the audience to be curious and be surprised
Yeah.
um, and feel the music somehow. So I tend to. I like to eat a banana. I don't know if it's psychological or if it's true, but I've heard that bananas kind of can slow down the heart rate a little bit.
Mm. Mm.
And I enjoy to just like breathe a little bit. I enjoy to play really slowly. I enjoy to play silly melodies actually. Like
Mm.
sometimes I'll play Hey Jude or like something from the Beatles or a pop
Yeah.
song or just a melody on the cello just to feel kind of free and comfortable and
Sure.
singing and like um basically I do what I can to feel really relaxed and good in my body
Yeah.
on the cello and to feel sort of like, oh, this is the first time doing this kind of.
Mm.
And um yeah, and that makes it so much more fun, and that makes immediacy much more natural to me.
Mm.
And I love immediacy. I think immediacy without any sort of reason doesn't always make a lot of sense. But it's like
Yeah.
if you really know a piece, you're not gonna play a place that is pianissimo fortissimo, but it might be a totally different color if you don't, if it's been ingrained in your body, and then you play it a little differently.
Yeah.
It might be a color you hadn't discovered or that hasn't been heard before even. I mean,
Hmm.
the most nice thing when you hear a concert is when you hear a color you haven't heard before. I mean,
Mm. Yeah.
I love that. So, yeah, so what I try to go in just with a very, very open mind, and
Hmm.
before that is all of the work, but by then is a celebration and an invitation to my entire process.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And that's so great. I mean, yeah, trying to keep things fresh. But I'm curious because I'm sure there's pieces like let's say the Dvorak Concerto or some of the Bach suites that you've probably performed hundreds of times now. And
Mm.
like how do you like psychologically try to keep it fresh in your mind? Like what do you do to go about that?
Um, that's a good question. I tend to like I think that if it breathes, that's a good thing. And when I
Mm.
hear the melody, I'll still somehow I'll hear that melody and I'll still be in love with it somehow. It's not that my like and the fact that I'm still in love with it and I'm like 27 now as to when I was
Mm-mm.
16 or something the first time I was in love with it in a way makes it a different piece because the way I fall in love is different than when I was 16 and
Yeah.
the way I play is different and the way I hear is different.
Mm.
So like if one embraces it as like a whole life kind of thing and really trusts that and in a way trusts the fact that things changes, and I think
Mm.
change is hard but still things changes and they do, and what can you
Mm.
really do about it? And then it's like you're still gonna hear it differently because it's a different day and the light is
Yeah.
different. And like I feel like awareness is important. And if one can like feel the light or the imagination behind the work and at the same time be where you are and
Yeah.
be centered and stuff, it's like sort of like it's just always different, I think. Even
Mm.
even if it's the 500th time you're playing something. And I think that's why there's those Baroque musicians who've played those Bach suites a
Mm.
trillion times, is because they really have, they really realized that.
Mm.
And so yeah, I think that's my way of just like, you know, if you bring about awareness, I think it will always somehow feel different, but you'll
Yeah,
still love it.
yeah,
And I think that's the beautiful thing about it.
yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
going back
I mean,
to
of
the
course, I've
book,
had.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I
No, no,
mean,
go ahead, go ahead.
I mean, I'm not saying that no matter what, any day I'm gonna be like, oh, this is the best. Sometimes I feel like shit, and playing the cello, and I'm like, oh my God, it
Yeah.
sounds horrible, and like, really, I can't really do this, and I'm like, I guess I gotta quit. And I do it for a couple of hours, and then like usually, oh, it's a bit better now. Now I feel a
Yeah,
bit better, and then like. I can't make it breathe. Why can't I make it? And then you forget about it. And like my
yeah.
my uncle, he's also my uncle Ian is very much like this.
Mm.
He's just saying like, oh, I can't play the violin, and when I start thinking about my fingers or my hand, I can't. But then if I just move the bow, then suddenly I'm just moving the bow, and then there's music, and then I hear music, and then it's like,
Yeah.
so there's a sort of effortlessness to making music, which can be
Right,
hugely frustrating sometimes because you really want to make music, and
right.
then it's like, why am I not making music? I'm really trying. And it's like, maybe I shouldn't try. Oh, now I'm making music. It's such a paradox.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, and it's interesting going back to Bach because you talk about the repeats, and back in Bach's time when he was writing music and he put repeats, I don't think he put the repeats with the expectation that the performer would do it the same both times, right? Like, I
oh,
mean, but back then people studied or were more comfortable with improvising, like you were mentioning.
yeah,
And I mean, up until I would say about like the 20th century, I think improvisation was just part of your regimen, honestly, as a musician.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think it really kind of goes back to like our stunted growth with our individual voices is we're so like narrow-minded sometimes as musicians, with like, all right, I have to play what's on the page, I have to just do what's
mhm,
there. And back then, like, it was almost unheard of for musicians to not be able to improvisate on the
yeah.
spot, or come up with different ornaments or whatever. And it's yeah, it's really
And
fascinating
it's so
actually.
much fun. I'm
Yeah.
trying that more and more with the years of like improvising over those suites and the repeats
Mm,
and like finding new things or a new little
mm,
thing you can do here and there. And like I did it actually for the first time. I tried doing it on the spot like a month
mm.
and a half ago with the
Oh
repeats
wow.
because I had been practicing improvising a little bit over them, and
Mm,
then
right.
at the moment I was like, oh, I'll do a trill here, I'll do a little scale here, and like I mean, it was I'm definitely not a master of that kind of a thing yet, but it was really interesting to try
Yeah,
and do it. And actually it felt really refreshing, and I think the audience enjoyed it, and like
yeah.
I think it's just so much fun. So
Mm,
I think people who are, I mean, it's of course good to be serious and want to play music and
yeah.
whatever, but like when you just open the mind a little bit and don't necessarily change spend, you can spend more time on it even.
Yeah.
Like, but if you're having some fun at the same time, then it's like great. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of in the spirit. Have you dabbled at, writing your own cadenzas for the Haydn concerti or anything like that? Or
Not yet. No, I
yeah.
haven't come to. Yeah, I do have some ideas brewing. It's not as much
Sure.
the cadenzas, but it's actually more doing like arrangements of pop songs or jazz classics that I love, and like playing them as
Okay.
encores with the string section of an orchestra or something like that.
Oh, great. Yeah.
That I've been dreaming about doing at some point, and now I'm saying it in public because I'm pressuring myself to that it's gonna happen at some point.
Yeah. We'll all look
But
forward to it.
yeah, within the next 10 years, I promise.
Yeah.
fun will happen on that arena.
Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
you mentioned your interest in jazz and your appreciation for jazz. I understand that you listen to a lot of different genres of music for that matter. Um, for you, how has listening to, let's say, rock or jazz music help influence your work when you come back to the cello?
Oh, it's influenced it a lot because it's just refreshed playing the cello so much. I feel
Mm,
like recently I've been freaking out over this Mingus album, as I mentioned earlier. Um, yeah, and I used to be a complete David Bowie fanatic for like
mm,
2.5 years. I would listen to all of his albums, and I'm really curious about artists in general. And the thing that really fascinated me about David Bowie back then was the fact that every single album he made is like widely different from one another. They're
mm,
like it almost sounds like different voices and different
mm,
universes and different genres for that
mm,
matter. And at the same time, he manages, you can still hear it's him somehow. It's like, wow, that's Bowie, even though it's like you're surprised, but it's like that's almost the condition of his music making is that
mm.
you're sort of
Yeah.
surprised and fascinated each time he makes an album. And I thought that was just so refreshing and so like, when a snake changes skin or whatever you call it,
Yeah, the
you know,
scale. Yeah.
the scale, yeah, is still the
Mm,
same snake.
yeah.
And this kind of stuff is always been great love for me. Recently, the reason I got so into Mingus is also I've been so very body mindful recently, and
Mm,
I've gone more. I feel like I've gone more from this vivid imagination, creative, like up here kind of
mm.
stuff
Yeah.
to being a bit more down
Yeah.
here and like
Mm,
feeling the body and like the sound and feeling the sound and reacting to the sound and these kind of things. And that Mingus album is just so deep. It's like
yeah.
tribal. It's basically a tribal album. It really sounds like uh, a mixture of everything in his life. And I mean, of course, he was an African American in a really bad time, and he was treated very badly, and all of this. In a way, I feel like he actually transcended that. He
Mm,
transcended the politics of the condition of
mm,
his life to something else, because it was in a way more about his kind of, for me, the way I felt when I was listening to it was more in a way
mm,
more about his anger and frustration towards how he's
mm,
been treated, and he's there with his friends, and they're just listening like crazy. They are
yeah.
so instinctive, and listening it just comes from deep inside,
Mm.
and the depth of that inspired me hugely. I've listened a lot to Jan Johansson as well, Swedish pianist, who
Oh
actually
yeah.
helped me play Bach a lot.
Mm,
He does a lot of Swedish folk songs, and
mm,
these really cute Swedish folk songs and melodies he'll do like very simple jazz arrangements over. And
mm,
there's something about the way he touches the piano and his touch, basically, that
mm,
is just so ringing and so many
mm,
overtones and so simple and so deep and creative at the same time.
mm,
And I was listening to that for a long time when I love going for long walks, and I went for a really
mm,
long walk once, and I was listening to it, and then I went home. I practiced Bach afterwards, and
mm,
there's something in common with Bach and Jan Johansson, I feel like,
mm,
and it really helped, like
mm,
the touch and the lightness and
mm,
the delicacy of those sweets.
mm,
Yeah. So I feel like if one draw, I mean, in my opinion, as much inspiration, I mean, inspiration is a beautiful element, and when one has it, it's like
yeah.
grab it, and take it, and use it. And that's why I mostly don't listen to classical music because I really do I spend so much time with it and I do look
Yeah.
at and I spend time with teachers or other musicians and like
Yeah.
and point there but with classical music there's you often hear a point of view when you're listening to
Right. Right.
especially if I'm listening to other cellists it's actually it's more distracting than it's constructive to me in a way. Uh, like I mean, because it's great and
Yeah.
everyone's great, but it's
Yeah.
like, how's this helping me? It really helps me more to listen to something that is has nothing to do with the cello actually, but just
Yeah.
has something to do with music, which
Yeah.
is like I mean, I completely adore the cello. I in love with the cello, but it's really something you want to express through the instrument. It's not the actual instrument, and like
Right.
and um yeah, so that's like I love Bowie and Pink Floyd and
Mm.
um Mingus and John Coltrane is one of my absolute favorites. And I feel like if one listens enough and looks enough around for the golden drops of albums that are out
Mm.
there, one can draw so many parallels. Like I found a really strong parallel between Dutilleux and his like, for example, the solo piece Trois Strophes sur le nom de Sacher for solo
Mm.
cello. I found so much in common with John Coltrane's tonal language in many of his solos, because that both of them are so fascinated by the row of overtones,
Mm.
ya da ya da, and so on.
Mm.
That it feels like John Coltrane is improvising over that very often, and Dutilleux
Mm.
is writing from that in a way.
Mm.
And like that's a really weird parallel to draw. I
Yeah.
know, but it's like I feel like one can really find it also with books and with
Yeah.
paintings and sometimes it's dangerous to be a sponge, and I am very much a sponge, but I think
Mm.
it's also a really good thing to have and to really especially the good things like if you hear or if you hear someone say something or you hear a piece of or someone playing something and you don't enjoy it, I think is better to take a bit of a small distance to it so it
Yeah.
doesn't have a negative impact on your own private
Mm.
practicing life and whatever. um like I'm not a big fan of opinions, but I think if something affects one a bit negatively, it's a good idea to just like, push back a tiny bit. But if something affects you positively, then for God's sake, go into it
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
investigate it all you want. And yeah, that's like my basic kind of philosophy, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and did you always have this passion for listening to other genres from an early age?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. It became stronger with the years.
Hmm.
When I was younger, I was a Rostropovich fanatic. When I was like
Sure.
14, I was listening to
Yeah.
Rostropovich all the time, and
Yeah.
but then someone said that I sounded like someone trying to be Rostropovich, and then I stopped listening to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think maybe that also had a really big impact on my kind
Mm.
of not really listening to many cellists
Yeah.
more in my current life. It's just because I am a sponge, and if like I'd rather be inspired by something I could never replicate,
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than be inspired by something which is possible for me to like even subconsciously replicate. It definitely wasn't
Yeah.
intentional
Yeah.
to have a Rostropovich kind of way of playing when I was
Yeah.
younger, but it just kind of happened because I was freaking out over his playing, and I mean that's not necessarily a bad thing, but
Yeah.
especially when one is young, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But it's also been a part of my kind of quest for staying myself and
Mm.
staying free and like individual, which is hard to do, and because that's a great conflict as well. That's something many people
Yeah.
with the like being yourself and and knowing the piece and going into this and I think one is more oneself than ever when one is in the piece and knows the music really well as a
Right.
classical musician, but I don't think one is very much oneself if one has like obsessively, especially if it's only one recording you've listened to. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that's healthy
Yeah.
for the music or for yourself either.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you when it comes to like not listening to cellists because when I listen to classical music, I try to focus more on just pianists because
Yeah.
yeah, like sometimes violinists, but even then it's like we're still kind of in the same similar
Yeah.
category. So I don't know, it's just string playing like yeah, of course, like you said, it's great to listen to, but it's like there's so many other conflicting thoughts that are going through your head like that
Yeah.
are more technical or maybe other things, but yeah,
Yeah.
with for me, pianos is great because you
Oh, I
know
listen to a lot of pianists too. That's
yeah,
actually much more. I love listening to like Horowitz or
yeah,
Rubinstein or I can't remember his name. There's another pianist who Schnabel, Otto Schnabel, who I love
yeah,
just
yeah,
yeah. Yeah. But
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I interrupted
it's
you.
no, you're fine, you're fine. And I just no because with pianists, it's like there's something very unique about the colors that they're able to get with the way they pedal and
Yeah.
I get goosebumps literally when I hear pianists that are able to like really create that atmosphere with the color. And it's just, and I think that is something that we can all try to aspire to whatever instrument we play. But it's, yeah, it's pianos for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
Well,
sure.
this has been really, really fun and very inspiring. Before we close, do you have any final words of wisdom to our audience? Oh, for our audience, especially the younger ones that may be cultivating their own passion for music.
Oh, yeah. Um, I would say explore all of the music you're interested in. If any genre that whoever is interested in, I would explore and go into and when practicing, try to give yourself a chance. And I would also say, just because you practice 4 hours a day, if someone is practicing 4 hours a day, that's great, and don't stop doing that, but find more ways of learning to enjoy it
Mhm.
and find love for it. And I think love is what makes the world kind of go round, even though society tells us other things very often. I really think that, and I think for the young ones to find a way to trust themselves and like if they love writing, if they like whatever you really actually at the end of the day, whatever you love doing the most, I think is what you should be doing, whether it is playing or writing or dancing or
Mhm.
acting or any kind of art form. And ask questions and I would say if something hurts you, stay skeptical towards that and don't trust it because that's not something that is there to necessarily to help you. That's maybe something for you to overcome or to think about or to learn to get over. There's a lot of things that are challenging in the classical music world, and the most important parts of it is to enjoy the process more than anything, rather than uh, being frustrated and wanting a result. Actually, to enjoy spending the time on it will create a much more beautiful result at the end. Um, so I think that's what I would say. Yeah.
That's really wonderful. That's so beautiful. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for your generosity and your time. Um, we wish you nothing but just continued joy and love for music and all your endeavors moving forward. So.
Thank you so much.